Well, greetings. I'm Dr. Dean Blevins. I'm the director of the Nazarene Theological Seminary Nurturing Care with Children Through Worship and Prayer initiative that is funded by the Lilly Endowment Incorporated. And it's my privilege to send you this video as part of an invitation to our first Makers Space, which is a kind of creative retreat that merely acknowledges that the Lord our God is indeed our maker, and that we're being called into a kind of creative process where basically we'll gather together on March 22nd and uh, basically that Friday evening at 5:30, and we'll stay together till March 23rd around 4:30 in the afternoon, where we will be engaged in a kind of creative process where we're just asking one question. That in a world full of shoulds and musts and need tos and have tos, and in a world that often we feel requirements or obligations or sometimes just being prohibited or things we feel like we cannot do, we're just going to ask one simple question. How might we? In the midst of all the challenges that we face, all the other kinds of expectations, how might we actually come up with creative strategies that make a difference in the lives of children through worship and prayer in such a way that it actually nurtures care in their lives? And that is what our retreat will be about. Now, as I'm already indicating, as a result of that, is that the retreat really is an invitation just to try out some ideas. And I'm providing this video, which actually is using a lot of the same slides I'll talk about when we come together, just to kind of get your creative juices flowing, your reflective postures engaged, even before you come to the retreat itself. And so this is not preliminary to the retreat. Some of these same elements will show up there, but I wanted you to have an adequate orientation before you arrive so you would bring that creativity with you and have an opportunity to be ready and and eager when it comes to how you'll engage this material. Now, the ideas that we're going to be trying out really involves a kind of four-step process where, yes, we'll take a little time naming some challenges as we gather. We'll find some problems worth exploring. Then we'll hopefully develop some strategies that will help us find solutions to those problems. And my real hope and prayer is that by the time you're ready to leave, we'll also be able to build partnerships that then the grant can fund through a series of mini grants to kind of support the partnerships as you're working together and seeking those solutions, seeking those creative projects that you want to engage in. We'll be borrowing from, for those of you who would like to kind of know the background of how the retreat's constructed, well, we're borrowing from some ideas from Tim Brown and his book Change by Design, particularly his emphasis on divergent thinking, where he talks about different ways we can create choices, create ideas, and then convergent thinking out of the many ideas that we have, how we learn how to make choices as we move forward. Another book to be thinking about as we're engaged really is that of Lorenzo Labria's book, How to Try, and his three-step process, where right from the very first night, we'll be generating insights that we can develop into ideas. I'll use the language many times as strategies that we can try after the retreat to see how well those strategies go. As a matter of fact, the retreat really is part of a year-long process where after the retreat, well, where we do identify those challenges and design a sort of strategy, hopefully with two, three churches working together, then you launch from there and you begin to implement and yes, adjust that strategy with opportunities to kind of report back how it's going and discuss it with the very churches you're engaged in. And then, in light of the basic feedback loop that we're hoping you'll build as you hear from children and parents and participants that are involved in this initiative, you can make even finer adjustments as you go along. Now, I will say that we will have a gathering about mid-year that we bring everybody together as a kind of day of learning where we'll explore some of the underlying issues around, well, worship and prayer practices with children or underlying issues around nurturing care in and among children and congregations at large. And often try to find some time to learn from each other in and through these presentations. Then at the end of the year, we'll have a process for evaluating how you've done for the year and also seeking whether or not the strategy, the project's worth repeating for another second full year, or whether or not there would be opportunities to move forward with even other new projects as that one ends. And so this year process will actually go for 4 years. And our hope is to resource a number of churches on the Northern California district over that period of time so that we're all kind of working together and sort of engaging worship and prayer practices in a way that, well, deepen experiences of God, but nurturing care with children. So, what will we do this first year? Well, the first year, the only kind of wrinkle that might change from year to year is the first of the four, if you might think of it, postures. And so each year we'll take on what is called a virtue or a posture that we are hoping to basically, we believe will make a difference in children's lives in a way that collectively in those through those four kind of postures deepens their understanding of care for each other and God's care in their life. And so we'll start with what we think is a fairly important, but maybe a little easier one to take on from the beginning, and that's gratitude. And so we'll be asking you to think creatively, how do we help children through worship and prayer practices to learn to give thanks for God's good creation, to give thanks for the different people in their lives, to give thanks for God's assistance, how God is at work in their lives, and just to learn how to pray with thankful hearts. That is not a heavy duty mandate, but it is kind of thinking about how gratitude infiltrates our worship and prayer practices as we go along. And then you'll be invited to come up with those creative strategies and projects. And one thing we will also be asking is how does gratitude get expressed in and through your culture, your context? And I mean more than Thanksgiving Day, but are there certain expressions of gratitude that are part of your own cultural heritage that might assist in our understanding of how to give thanks to God? And how does your context sort of feed into this process will be part of our discussion during the retreat. To begin, we would like you to start thinking about, how children experience the world from their point of view. So we're asking for the POV, point of view is not your point of view. As a minister, I know you have great concerns and you have a real love for the children. But how often do you invite actually to see the world through a child's eyes? How often do you really listen to the child's experiences, the experiences and how they name those experiences, or their hopes and expectations? Or how often do you attend to the challenges that they might face as they live into the world that they inhabit? And how often have you paused to listen to children talk about the concerns or questions they might have as they just grow and develop as they make their journey in life? And so we're going to ask you to come sort of ready, if you will, to talk about the questions and to maybe relate a couple of stories about the journey of children in your midst of your ministry. And how is it that you sort of really learn to listen to them and what they have to offer as we gather together? So that's a preliminary assignment. If you don't do anything else in preparation for the retreat, that's one I really want you to be thinking about. So, how do you see life from the point of view of the children? And I would say, yes, the parents as well, but definitely the kids. How do they see and experience the world as they encounter your church, as they encounter their world? And what difference does that make as we enter into our creative process together? Now, once you arrive, we will, after we talk a little bit about seeing the world through their eyes, we'll start talking about the real problems and working towards solutions. So, one thing that's a big idea that I want you to hold on to as we go through the rest of this presentation, as we gather together, is that our goal is that you can leave with a strategy to explore, not a solution to implement. Let me say that again, that you'll leave the retreat with a strategy to explore, not a solution to implement. We hope that you really will come out with, well, one way to say it is a way of engaging those problems in a new light through a kind of reframing of them as we talk about them at the retreat. We really want you to actually come up with what I would call a wicked good problem. Now, you might not want to use the language wicked in your local congregation, but wicked good means that's just a really neat problem that really is hard to define. And the solution really isn't known, but wouldn't it be fun to really explore that problem more deeply and come up with strategies, projects, if you will, to get at the underneaths of that problem and maybe come up with a solution we might not even know how to resolve at this point in time. So we're going to build toward an answer. We're not going to ask you to leave with the answer already fixed in your mind, but we are going to ask you to leave with a strategy that will help you build toward that answer. Now, to do so, we will talk about avoiding gravity problems. And these are just problems you cannot change. There are sometimes really big rock problems that, in light of well, just in light of what we're engaged in, the challenges that we're going to have with the grant itself, there may be really important problems, but you can't fix them all. Instead, we're going to be looking for the kind of problems that you know you can work on and you suspect you might actually be able to find an answer to. And part of our discussion will be how to avoid the gravity problems while we're looking for those really kind of wicked good problems that we can engage in. And so we'll be asking you to reframe problems and in such a way that and ask what we can change given the challenges that we face. I think I've already said that. A good example is that sometimes it's staged. One thing we know when it comes to children and other people that often we wrestle about their exclusion in certain settings, and then the first thing we might do is say, well, how do we at least get them into and be a part of what we're about? But they may still feel segregated from what we're trying to accomplish, and so our next goal might be integration. How do we get them involved? Or inclusion. How do we make them feel like they're contributing in such a way that they're making a difference? But then finally, we really hope that, well, all children and parents truly belong together. Let me just say, for what we're doing, if you're living in a context that really is closer to exclusion and segregation, then the wicked problem you might be seeking is how do we really, well, focus at least on integrating a group of children into what we're doing on a regular basis. You may not be able in a year's time to get all the way to belonging, but at least if you can solve the problem of integration, it opens the door to inclusion and ultimately to belonging. So, in light of where you, church, your context is, what is it that you can accomplish will be really important as we go along. Now, I'm going to be reminding you during our gathering of the parameters. I really want to stress that from the Lilly Endowment, the Nurturing Care Project is really interested in, well, worship and prayer practices. That's the Lilly Endowment's primary goal. And their focus is elementary children. And they're really asking about elementary children in our context. So we're not asking you to solve the problems of elementary children around the world. But really, what is it about the nature of the children in our church context, our community, that you're asking you to engage in? And then the other major kind of bumper rails that we're really asking you to take serious is how will you also include nurturing care, but through the idea of giving thanks, through the theme of gratitude. And can you do it in partnership? Can you find friends at the retreat that you can work together? And that how you work together is yet to be determined, but we'll spend some time doing that. And then we will ask you, in light of these sort of big expectations, what are the challenges in your setting? Remember those problems I was talking about? Is your challenge, begin thinking now, is the challenge you have when it comes to these parameters, does it involve a way in which space is constructed? Is it something about the flow of worship? In other words, the way worship works in your setting? Is it something built around parental expectations? Are you sort of wrestling with a congregational mindset that might make a difference? Not asking for all those, but you might even name others. Just kind of brainstorm. But don't get bogged down. Just be honest. This is going to be a brainstorming exercise when we gather together. And this is probably where we'll kind of end up engaged with our work, maybe that first evening as we go forward. And we want you to at least be willing to be sort of pondering a kind of key challenge, something maybe you might even share with a couple of people at a common table, or maybe in the breaks, particularly over the evening, you find another church that's said, that's a similar problem to what we have. And that way, when you return to the retreat by the next day, we're ready to sort of name a problem, a given challenge, if you will, that you think are worth working on. And then we will go through some exercises. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them tonight, but the first one will be the five whys. This is just a kind of divergent thinking where we'll be creative. And yes, I'll be asking you to kind of pick a hunch based on the challenge and needs of your ministry that you really think hinders children from giving thanks through worship and prayer. What is that hunch? And then I'll ask you why. And I will go ahead and say, and then we will continue those whys for a number of uh, times so that not only you, but the people at your table can also write why. And that will give you a lot of different ideas that then you can put using Post-it notes, onto a piece of paper or onto a wall where you can kind of find out how those different whys sort of help you move toward maybe a problem you really think you can solve. So I hope you hear again. We're going to start with the issue. We're going to come up with lots of reasons for why that issue exists. And out of it, hopefully, there'll be a mixture that you might say, well, this is the one kind of problem I really would like to try to resolve. Not the answer I have, but this is the problem worth exploring. We'll also engage in a separate kind of brainstorming exercise. So we'll have two of these before it's all said and done. And we will spend some time, but we won't spend forever on each of them. But the other one is called How Might We? And this is a slightly different one. And so, for instance, if the goal is to help children give thanks and experience God in prayer, then how might we do that? And I'll just ask you to think about whatever that struggle you have and then explore different ways of engaging. So we'll talk about, well, what if we explore the opposite? What if the problem isn't trying to help children experience prayer, but what if children could lead us to pray better? So we might flip the reversal of that or question an assumption. What if children are praying, but we're just not listening? How could we learn to listen better? Or create an analogy from need. I mean, is it that the need is that children need some kind of prayer or worship guides, or do they need some kind of imagery in space that reflects their cultural context that they identify with better? And so, could it be an artistic answer to our problem? And the last one is maybe, change the status quo. And this kind of goes back to the opposite, but what if we need children to help us give thanks? How would that change the way in which we approach the constraint or the problem? These are merely brainstorming ideas that kind of help you think about, well, what would be some different ways of approaching this challenge and finding the best problem to work on? To do that, we will spend some time during the retreat, one more time, kind of bringing all those ideas together and sort of drawing connections by moving notes. And so, those of you who've done some brainstorming probably know that process. And we'll try to be looking for the way different people's responses, not just our own, but others, kind of help us better see the problem that we're trying to face. Now, I'm hoping by then you have two or three churches that are together working on a similar problem, but at least even if you just have some people that are contributing to your own brainstorming, they are all also helping to point out points of connection. We'll even engage in a template approach that some of you are probably familiar with, where we talk about high benefit and low energy, or high benefit and high energy, low benefit, low energy, low benefit, high energy, just the different kinds of things we might try out to do. Hear this, try them out. But we might ask this question again from that point of view of the child or the parent. So not what works best for us, but what might work best for someone else. And these are merely sort of strategies of sort of, again, moving to a kind of process of convergent thinking together so that we're working and talking to each other in a way that we're beginning to find, well, the way in which a strategy might really help us get at a given problem. And then we'll come up with a kind of blueprint, a strategy, some kind of way of really thinking about how we might move forward with this big idea. I will ask you to kind of think about a way of concretizing that. You don't have to worry about that now. Walk us through this idea that mainly because a lot of ministry involves processes. So I'll kind of walk us through whether or not the best way to sort of concretize it, just think about it in a concrete way is, are you really trying to build up? If you're working on resources, are you really want to think about what that resource might look like, or at least a handout that describes what the resource will do? Thinking about an event, could you create an event guide of what that might look like? If it's a process, could you come up with a playbook that sort of shows the different elements of the process and how to do those and sort of lay those out? So those will be part of our work together. And at that point, you might be working on that for a couple of months. So this is part of that sort of adjusting as you go along. But hopefully you'll have enough of a concrete idea of how you might begin that you know you feel comfortable starting. That's part of what the retreat hopes to do. And we're going to invite both engineers and artists to contribute to that so that you think both about the steps you might need, but also how is everything going to flow together. You will be asked before the retreat is over to come up with a presentation canvas. We know these may not be very elaborate, but we do hope that you will be able to create enough information that you might be able to put it out on this chart. And if that looks daunting now, recognize that this is where we sort of wrap up toward the end of our retreat, where hopefully we'll be able to name all the elements we need if we were going to implement this strategy into the next year. And it's a good way right from that point to just recognize whether it's a strategy worth pursuing or not as we move forward. Now, I'm going to stop at that point. There's a little bit more information, but I hope this has been enough to get your juices flowing. I am going to back up again, but I'll reverse engineer all this kind of creative activity that we've been talking about and move back to this one slide. If anything, if you can, between now and our time together, really begin to dwell with children in your ministry context, have a conversation with a parent or two. Try to understand the world they live in, the experiences they have. And if you can do that and arrive with a kind of deep-seated awareness of where the children in your ministry, those elementary school children are, then I think you'll be in good shape to begin to move forward to, well, seeking this strategy that we hope to explore. And again, let me stress, not feeling pressed to have a solution that you have to implement. The retreat process is really designed to move us into a kind of creative posture that then continues throughout the year. So I hope you feel sort of ready to at least engage as we come together. Yeah, I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying not that an apple falls on your head, obviously, but I will be praying that in this sort of field of nurturing care, that you'll begin to think about the fullness of what, well, we might be able to accomplish when we are engaged together and we're called to really do ministry for the sake of God's kingdom. So blessings to all, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the retreat.